The Bloomberg Nanos Canadian Confidence Index, a composite of a weekly measure of financial health and expectations, has hit a high watermark this week, 63.7%. So what has Canadians feeling so optimistic? Nik Nanos is with us now, Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research Group. Nik, great to have you with us. And let's just start right there. I think we can pop the graph up to keep it in perspective of where we've been. But why are Canadians feeling so good right now?
Well, we see two things happening. First of all, the numbers for real estate and the proportion of Canadians that think that real estate will increase has basically hit an all-time high in our tracking. We started tracking this back in 2008. It's never been more positive. About almost more than 6 out of every 10 Canadians think that the value of real estate is going to go up. They're also feeling stronger about the economy. So roll that up with vaccines. And basically, we are on a consumer confidence, what do we call it? Roller coaster ride up, where people think things are going to be getting better and are feeling much more confident than they have been in the last 6 months.
And we're looking at the component of this, which is the percentage of Canadians that see home prices rising over the next 6 months. It is at this incredibly high level, much higher, even when we look back at kind of some previous little mini booms. I guess it seems sort of obvious to say this, Nik, but what goes up could come down. That those expectations could change. How much of that component of the index is driving that overall high level?
Well, the real estate makes up about a quarter of the index score. It's up. The positive real estate views are up 8 to 9 percentage points just in the last 4 weeks. And that's a significant rise for a short period of time. And I think what we're seeing is a positive fallout from the pandemic. More Canadians than ever have been teleworking. I think for many Canadians, they're looking at their living space and wondering whether it's going to be a long-term place that they can work. And as a result, they're much more active in the market. They're looking at probably trading up or even moving out into the country or in the suburbs. And as a result, there's just a lot more action on real estate right now, right across the board.
And there are a lot of moving parts to that, but presumably some of the optimism generally and around real estate will be around what's happening with COVID, that there's some kind of normal in our future. Do you have an assessment of where the accuracy of that, the importance of getting vaccines right, for instance, and the variants under control play into all this?
Yeah, well, we know that from the polling that we've done that the vaccinations and the role of the vaccinations has had a bit of a buoyant impact on people's views, not just of the federal government, but where the economy is also going. When we ask Canadians whether they think the economy is going to get stronger or weaker in the next 6 months, it's up a whopping 11 percentage points in 4 weeks, up to 42%, while only 29% think that it's going to get weaker. So you kind of roll all these things up, and including, Amanda, we talked about this in the past, people saving money and paying down their debts, that they've been repairing their balance sheets since the pandemic started with all this stimulus money, and I think they're chomping at the bit to spend, and they're expecting now that the vaccinations are now starting to get rolled out in earnest, and they can see that their friends and neighbors and loved ones are getting vaccinated. They can see perhaps light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a freight train. It looks like it's a much more hopeful light in terms of what people expect in the next 6 months.
And if that should change, and we do have these warnings about reopening too quickly and the variants taking off, how quickly do you think that the sentiment could shift, Nik? Just today, even as we hear some parts of Ontario may loosen restriction, we know some other of the zones have gone deeper into lockdown today. It's still a bit of a mixed bag out there in terms of how we're going to respond to the pandemic, which is still with us.
Absolutely. And, the thing is when we look at volatility like this, it can cut both ways. In a short period of time, there are announcements related to the acquisition and supply of vaccinations. If there's a third wave or a fourth wave, or if there's a narrative that we have to start shutting down again, it could be a quick reversal from the positive trend that's happening right now. But it looks like, at least today in the weekly tracking, that people seem positive about the future and they think that things are moving in the right direction. But that's all it takes are big provinces like Ontario and Quebec to shut down. They make up 2/3 of the population and a big part of the economy, and these positive numbers can turn very quickly into negative numbers.
So, and I would imagine a positive feeling about the pandemic will play well for the incumbent Liberal government. What is your political data showing in terms of polling and where Canadians are these days?
Well, right now, at least in the Nanos tracking, we have the Liberals with a fairly comfortable advantage over the Conservatives, about 7 to 8 percentage points, and they're in majority territory. You know, the interest, if an election were held today, that's the big if. But, you know, right now it seems the Liberals are saying that they don't want an election during the pandemic. The NDP are saying that. The Conservatives are saying that. So not an election on the horizon unless someone changes their minds. But right now, at least, perceptions related to the pandemic, the rollout of the vaccinations is having a materially positive impact on the Liberal numbers today. And but it's kind of like the volatility in consumer confidence, right? It's up today, but if something goes south or sideways, it can turn quite negative quite fast. So it's quite fragile at this particular point in time.
And, you know, it's really interesting because of our system. If we can just hang on this chart for a second, control room, and go back to the chart, control room. You know, we see the Liberals obviously high, the Conservatives neck and neck, slightly below, arguably, the NDP. Precisely the kind of combination that got the Liberals elected back in 2016. So I guess the question I would put is that a perfect formula for the Liberals in terms of how the vote plays out, or could the cards just be dealt differently this time, regardless of the fact that it looks quite similar?
Well, the Liberal win, to your point, has to do with bringing all the progressive voters under one tent, and they've been good at doing that. For the Conservatives, you know, the interesting thing for the Conservatives to be competitive and win, they basically have to get some Liberal voters, blue Liberals, Liberals that are more focused on financial and fiscal issues, prosperity, business, all that kind of stuff, and to get them to swing back from the Liberals into the Conservative column. And if Aaron O'Toole can do that, the gap can narrow. And, you know, when you look at the numbers, there are periods in time in the last year where the Conservatives really quickly closed the gap because people were disaffected with the Liberals and they shifted into the blue column. That's what Aaron O'Toole has to hope for.
And this next question, Nick, will have people remembering that journalists can take a glass half full story and make it empty in a heartbeat. But sometimes these positive indices, when we look at an index that's at a record high, they're actually contrarian trigger points. Investor sentiment gets high and it's time for the market to correct. Is there something similar in this data that you've seen over time, or can we just trust that consumers are feeling good for a reason and that's okay?
Actually, you know, the data, when you look at the long-term trend line back to 2008, it's very similar to the 2008-2009 phenomenon. You know, back then what we saw was a sharp drop in confidence and then a quick recovery in confidence when Canadians thought that things were going to get back to normal back in 2009. And we're seeing a very similar trend line to that. So, you know, I would say that all things being equal, if there aren't any big changes on the pandemic front, we're probably going to see a bit of a spike and then back down to trailing off into a normalization of the trend line where we won't be as exuberant, but we'll be feeling a little better than we have been, at least in the last 2 years.